Welcome to Southwest Desert, where adventure meets the arid beauty of the American Southwest. Join us as we explore the rugged landscapes, uncover hidden historical gems, and dive deep into the rich legends and culture of this iconic region. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on the latest desert adventures. Please leave a like or comment. This is very helpful. Let's journey together into the heart of the Southwest Desert. In the vast expanse of Texas frontier land, where civilization barely clung to the edges of wilderness, an 11-year-old girl found herself baptized in her mother's blood. The year was 1838, and as Rebecca Gilliland watched her parents fall to Comanche spears, she couldn't have known that her journey from captive child to one of the most influential women in Texas history had just begun. The woman who would one day save the Alamo first had to survive a massacre that claimed her family. Welcome to Southwest Desert, where we unearth the buried stories that shaped America. Today, we explore how a brutal frontier attack transformed a traumatized child into the woman who would ultimately preserve Texas's most sacred landmark. The Texas of 1838 was a dangerous, unstable place. The Republic was barely 2 years old. Violence was commonplace, and settlements existed in constant fear of raids. This precarious existence was the reality of the Gilliland family: Johnstone, the patriarch; Mary, his wife; their 11-year-old daughter Rebecca; and young son William. Their homestead near the Don Carlos Ranch in Refugio County placed them in particularly vulnerable territory, close to the lower San Antonio River and not far from where the infamous Fannin Massacre had occurred just 2 years earlier during the Texas Revolution. The Gilliland family was caught in a perfect storm of historical forces. Mexican General Rafael Vasquez had led forces into Texas, creating widespread unrest that stretched military resources thin. The Comanches, seeing opportunity in the chaos, intensified their raiding activities across the frontier. The Gilliland homestead, isolated from immediate military protection, presented an inviting target. It happened with the sudden violence that characterized frontier attacks. The family was outside their home when Comanche raiders appeared without warning. Johnstone Gilliland, immediately recognizing the danger, attempted to reach his rifle inside the house. He never made it. The Comanches intercepted him, cutting him down in full view of his horrified family. Mary Gilliland, driven by maternal instinct, gathered her children to her as the raiders approached. In her final moments, she held Rebecca and William close, offering prayers as the Comanches closed in. A spear pierced her body while she still clutched her children, her blood covering them as she died trying to shield them from harm. For 11-year-old Rebecca, these moments seared themselves into her memory. She remained conscious and horrifyingly aware throughout the ordeal, watching as the raiders pillaged their home, taking everything of value. Most devastating of all, they seized both children as captives, leaving their parents' bodies behind as they fled into the wilderness. Word of the attack spread quickly to nearby military forces, already mobilized due to the Vasquez invasion threat. A remarkable collection of historical figures happened to be in the area, men whose names would become legendary in Texas history. First Lieutenant Anthony B. Hannum of the Matagorda Riflemen, who would later document the events, was present. So was Dr. A.T. Axum of the same unit, destined to play a crucial role in treating young William Gilliland's wounds. Most notably, Albert Sidney Johnston, former Adjutant General of Texas and future Confederate general, took a leadership role in organizing the response. Alongside officers Andrew Neal and Alfred S. Thurmond, the town marshal of Victoria, they quickly formulated a pursuit strategy. Johnston called for 10 mounted men to reconnoiter, establishing a scouting force to locate the Comanches' movement patterns before launching a full rescue operation. The initial scouting phase revealed an Indian trail leading into the river bottom. After making camp briefly to prepare coffee, Johnston returned to the main command while Lieutenant Hannum took charge of the pursuit detachment. The final pursuit force consisted of half a dozen men under Hannum's direct command, joined by 15 scouts under Captain Price. Colonel Kerr, identified as the former purser of the Texas Navy, Dr. Axum, and a man known as John Dallum also participated in the chase. The pursuers found themselves in what records describe as hot pursuit, following a clear Comanche trail. The raiders had traveled through the night with their captives, carrying both children and the goods stolen from the Gilliland home. The pursuit force maintained their pace despite challenging conditions, gradually closing the distance through skillful tracking. The Comanches' travel pattern showed continuous movement throughout the night. They carried both children as captives, subjecting them to harsh travel conditions with no apparent consideration for rest or comfort. By morning the following day, the raiders had reached a location near the historic Fannin massacre site, where they finally halted, perhaps due to fatigue or a false sense of safety. What they didn't realize was how close their pursuers had come. When the Texans finally spotted the Comanche party, they witnessed something unexpected. Rather than continuing to flee, the raiders prepared for battle. They formed a defensive line upon spotting the approaching force, with a tall, elderly chief actively coordinating their defense. In a detail that highlights the cultural complexity of the encounter, witnesses reported that the chief ran along the battle line playing a flute, seemingly performing a ritual preparation for combat. Lieutenant Hannum made a tactical observation that would prove decisive. He spotted a prominent warrior on a decorated horse, described in his account as a gay Indian on a finely caparisoned horse, who presented a tempting target. Hannum took aim, fired, and successfully knocked the Comanche from his stolen mount. This opening shot had an immediate impact on Comanche morale. The raiders quickly dispersed to nearby woods, abandoning weapons including guns and shields in their hasty retreat. They left behind stolen horses, apparently prioritizing personal survival over everything else. The Texans reacted immediately to this retreat, quickly dismounting and preparing for combat in the woods. They anticipated the need for tree-to-tree fighting, maintaining tactical discipline as they advanced into the wooded area. It was during this chaotic moment that the Comanche raiders made a brutal decision regarding their captives. Young William Gilliland was deliberately wounded with a spear in his side, the injury described as deep. Left for dead, he was abandoned on the ground. His sister Rebecca was struck on the head and forcibly thrown from her horse. Despite her injuries, Rebecca remained conscious and aware of her surroundings. What happened next speaks to the remarkable character that would define Rebecca Gilliland's life. Despite being injured herself, her first instinct was to pray and then to locate her wounded brother. Finding William still alive, she physically helped carry him toward the edge of the woods. When she spotted approaching horsemen, she initially remained cautious, uncertain whether they represented another threat. Only when she recognized them as rescuers did she call out for assistance. Hannum's force located both children and immediately assessed their injuries. Dr. Axum personally attended to William, treating his deep lance wound under frontier conditions. Albert Johnston himself carried Rebecca, beginning the journey to Victoria, where the children would find safety in the home of Dr. Blaine, a Presbyterian minister. The remarkable part of this story isn't just the dramatic rescue, but what happened afterward. William Gilliland, despite suffering potentially fatal wounds, recovered completely. He grew to adulthood in Austin, becoming what records describe as a prominent citizen and contributing significantly to the Austin community. He rebuilt his life after childhood trauma in ways that would have seemed impossible in the aftermath of the attack. But it was Rebecca Gilliland whose life journey would prove truly extraordinary. After an extended stay with Dr. Blaine's family and adjustment to life after her traumatic experience, she pursued education at Rudersville College in 1844, attending the First Methodist College in Texas. This formal education, unusual for a frontier girl in the mid-19th century, would lay the groundwork for her remarkable future. Rebecca later married minister Orsoneth Fisher, establishing a new family and eventually becoming mother to 6 children. She created a stable family despite her traumatic childhood, demonstrating a resilience that would define her life. Her professional achievements were equally impressive. After relocating to Oregon with her husband, she co-founded Corvallis College and took a leadership position heading the female department, becoming an educational pioneer in 2 states before eventually returning to Texas. It was in historical preservation work that Rebecca Gilliland Fisher truly made her mark on Texas history. She became a charter member of the Daughters of the Republic of Texas and was elected state president of the organization, a position she would hold for an astonishing 32 years. Most significantly, she played an instrumental role in saving the Alamo from destruction, preserving what would become Texas's most sacred historical site. Her contributions earned her the distinction of being the only female member elected to the Texas Veterans Association. Her portrait even hung in the Senate chamber of the Texas State Capitol, a remarkable honor that recognized her transformation from captive child to respected state figure. When she died in Austin on March 23, 1926, Rebecca Gilliland Fisher had lived a life spanning from the Republic of Texas to the Roaring Twenties, witnessing and shaping nearly a century of Texas history. The Gilliland family massacre represents more than just another violent frontier incident. It illustrates the civilian vulnerability of the period and provides a documented example of the complex and often tragic interactions between settlers and indigenous peoples on the Texas frontier. The temporal connection to the Vasquez invasion period and geographic proximity to the Fannin massacre site places it within a broader historical context of Texas's tumultuous early years. The night is pitch black. A lone train cuts through the desolate Texas landscape west of the Pecos River. The year is 1912, and as the Southern Pacific locomotive makes an ordinary stop at Dryden Station, no one aboard realizes they're about to become part of the final chapter in America's Wild West train robbery era. What happens next will involve quick thinking, psychological manipulation, and brutal violence that leaves 2 notorious outlaws dead in pools of their own blood. And when it's over, the age of the train robber will be gone forever. Welcome to Southwest Desert. I'm your host, Alan, and today we're telling the extraordinary true story of the last train robbery. West of the Pecos. Even the name sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood Western. This harsh, unforgiving stretch of Southwest Texas was one of America's last true frontiers, a place where the law felt as distant as civilization itself. The region was infamous as a sanctuary for those running from the law. Its raw, rugged terrain made pursuit difficult. Hidden canyons provided natural refuge, and its proximity to the Mexican border offered convenient escape routes for anyone with a price on their head. It was precisely this lawless reputation that attracted a particular breed of outlaw in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And when the Southern Pacific Railroad drove its ceremonial Silver Spike in January 1883, connecting this remote territory to the outside world, it created an irresistible target. The Southern Pacific's Sunset Route connecting New Orleans to California was a marvel of engineering and a symbol of America's manifest destiny. But for opportunistic criminals, it represented something else entirely, a moving treasure chest, regularly carrying valuable shipments across an isolated landscape. The stretch between Del Rio and Sanderson became particularly notorious. Trainmen dreaded this route, with its isolated terrain and limited escape options. Natural features provided strategic advantages for ambushes, and settlements were few and far between. If trouble struck, help was nowhere to be found. Over the years, the Sunset Route earned a grim reputation as a prime target for train robbers. The infamous Black Jack Ketchum's gang once stole $6,000 in a single heist, the equivalent of over $180,000 today. Railway companies struggled to provide adequate security, and the robberies continued. But time was running out for this particular brand of outlaw. As America entered the 20th century, improved communications, better law enforcement, and changing technologies were making train robberies increasingly difficult to pull off successfully. Which brings us to the cold, dark desert night of March 12, 1912, and the stage for what would become the last major train robbery attempt on the Sunset Route. Our story's villains were no amateurs. Ben Kilpatrick, known as the Tall Texan, was a former member of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid's famous Wild Bunch gang. He had an established reputation in outlaw circles and was an experienced train robber with multiple successful heists under his belt. His partner, Frank Hobeck, commonly called Old Beck, had formed a criminal partnership with Kilpatrick while both men were in prison. Clearly, their time behind bars had done little to convince them that crime does not pay. If anything, their long confinement had hardened them rather than rehabilitated them. As Southern Pacific Engine 709 made its routine stop at the isolated Dryden station, two masked men easily boarded the locomotive. They immediately held Engineer Grosh and Fireman Holmes at gunpoint, taking control of the engine. The robbers ordered the train to stop at a predetermined location called Baxter's Curve, evidence that this wasn't a spontaneous crime, but a carefully planned operation. Meanwhile, Wells Fargo messenger David Andrew Trousdale was stationed as guard of a valuable shipment, the critical target of the robbery. He was completely unaware of the hostile takeover happening in the engine compartment until he was unexpectedly confronted by the armed and masked Hobeck. The robbers methodically established control. They lined up the crew, searching them for weapons. In a classic train robbery technique, they uncoupled the engine and mail cars from the passenger coaches, deliberately leaving passengers stranded in the desert to eliminate potential interference. The working portion of the train was moved approximately 1 mile down the tracks for privacy. The experienced criminals divided their labor tactically. Kilpatrick strategically remained with the engine, maintaining their escape capability, while Hobeck forcibly escorted Trousdale and his helper Reagan to the mail car. But something was off about Hobeck. He was unusually agitated and unpredictable. His excessive cursing and aggressive threats toward the Wells Fargo agents went beyond typical robbery procedure. His erratic behavior suggested desperation, creating an atmosphere of extreme danger for his captives. This is where our story takes an unexpected turn. David Trousdale, the Wells Fargo messenger, quickly recognized the dire situation and the need for strategic action. A physical confrontation would be futile without the element of surprise. But as he observed Hobeck's psychological vulnerabilities and emotional state, he developed a sophisticated strategy based on psychological manipulation. What happened next demonstrated remarkable composure and quick thinking under extreme pressure. Trousdale carefully crafted a false alliance with the robber. He convincingly feigned cowardice and submission to establish himself as a non-threat. He artfully expressed resentment toward his Wells Fargo employer, delivering believable complaints about inadequate salary and poor treatment. "Wells Fargo deserves to be robbed," he reportedly told Hobeck, aligning himself with the robber's worldview. Through shared grievances, he gradually established rapport. It was a systematic process of gaining Hobeck's trust and lowering his defenses. Trousdale maintained a consistent narrative of bitter complaining, building credibility. He noticed Hobeck's transition from threatening to attentively listening. Strategically, Trousdale began pointing out potentially valuable items in the car, positioning himself as an unexpected fellow conspirator. He had created the illusion of having switched sides in the robbery, masterfully manipulating Hobeck's greed and overconfidence. And then came Hobeck's series of fatal mistakes. Completely failing to notice Trousdale discreetly concealing a large ice maul under his coat, he carelessly leaned his Winchester rifle against the side of the railroad car, removing the immediate threat. Fatally turning his back on his supposed captive while examining a potential valuable package, he became fixated on promised valuable loot, blinded by greed. It was a fundamental failure to maintain proper control of a hostage situation, and Trousdale seized his moment. With perfectly timed execution, Trousdale launched a surprise attack with the concealed ice maul. He delivered a single powerful and lethal blow to Hobeck's head. Contemporary accounts graphically described the outcome. What few brains Frank Hobeck had spilled over the baggage car. He had instantly neutralized the first robber with decisive action, transforming from apparent victim to determined defender. But the danger wasn't over. Kilpatrick was still out there, armed and dangerous. Trousdale methodically prepared for a confrontation with the second robber. He tactically distributed Hobeck's pistols to Reagan and Mail Clerk Bank while keeping the more powerful Winchester rifle for himself. The group carefully positioned themselves and settled in to wait for Kilpatrick, creating an impromptu defensive perimeter within the mail car. What followed was a psychologically tense, extended waiting period. Kilpatrick's continued absence created mounting tension. Trousdale's nerves reached what witnesses later described as a raw edge with the prolonged anticipation. Growing concerned about Kilpatrick's activities or potential escape, he finally fired a strategic shot through the roof to draw attention or provoke a response. It worked. The climactic final confrontation with the tall Texan began with Kilpatrick's tentative calls for his partner. "Frank? Frank?" His hesitant approach and delayed investigation of the gunshot revealed his uncertainty. Eventually, he cautiously peered around the door, a critical moment of vulnerability. Trousdale demonstrated remarkable marksmanship under extreme pressure, firing a single precise shot to Kilpatrick's left eye that was instantly fatal. The bullet dramatically exited the back of the outlaw's head and embedded in the wall of the baggage car. As one witness put it, Kilpatrick never knew what hit him, the element of complete surprise. With that single shot, the second robber was eliminated with tactical precision, and one of the last violent chapters of the American Wild West was written. The train finally continued at 5 a.m., several hours behind schedule. But there was an alarming discovery yet to come. The robbers had carried 6 sticks of dynamite and a bottle of highly unstable nitroglycerin, indicating potential for a much more destructive outcome had their original plan proceeded. When the train reached Sanderson Station, the bodies were formally unloaded and, in keeping with the macabre practices of the era, propped up for grisly photographs, visual proof of their demise for authorities and a stark demonstration of consequences for potential criminals. Trousdale's extraordinary heroism received formal recognition. Wells Fargo awarded him a substantial $1,000 reward, unusually generous by company standards. The Southern Pacific Railroad added a significant $500 reward. Grateful passengers even donated a commemorative gold medal. Trousdale was elevated to hero status in both company and public perception. The event that occurred on Friday, March 13, 1912, ironically an unlucky date for the robbers, definitively marked the end of the train robbery era on the Sunset Route. It represented a closing chapter in a particular form of frontier crime and symbolized the transition from the lawless frontier to a more civilized era. If you would like to contribute to my channel, join my Patreon community and discover my art print products on my website in the links provided in my description. Also, if you would like a particular image from my videos, give the timestamp for the image, and I will upload it to my website and Patreon. Thank you. In the shadow of the towering Guadalupe Mountains, where the endless Texas sky meets rugged limestone peaks, a story of courage, determination, and American expansion unfolds. The year is 1858. The California gold rush is in full swing, and a nation divided by growing tension seeks connection across a vast continent. Before the Transcontinental Railroad, before the telegraph line stretched from coast to coast, there was the Butterfield Overland Mail, a lifeline of communication spanning 2,800 miles from St. Louis to San Francisco, crossing some of the most treacherous terrain in North America. And nowhere was the journey more perilous than through the forbidding Guadalupe Mountains of West Texas. Welcome to Southwest Desert, the channel that explores the hidden histories carved into the American landscape. Today, we journey along the Butterfield stage route through the Guadalupe Mountains, where bandits lurked, Apache warriors watched from hidden vantage points, and stagecoach drivers pushed themselves and their teams to the limits of human and equine endurance. This is not just a story about mail delivery. This is a tale of America's westward ambition, the clash of cultures, and the individuals who risked everything to connect a growing nation. The Butterfield Overland Mail Company began operations in September 1858, fulfilling a government contract to establish regular mail service between the eastern United States and the booming settlements of California. John Butterfield, a transportation entrepreneur from New York, secured the lucrative contract worth $600,000 annually, approximately $19 million in today's currency. The route stretched across the southern United States, a strategic choice to avoid the harsh winter conditions that had proven deadly on more northern paths. From St. Louis and Memphis, the southern route converged at Fort Smith, Arkansas, before continuing through Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and into California. The entire journey took approximately 25 days, a remarkable achievement for the time, though modern travelers might balk at spending nearly a month in constant transit. Within this expansive route, the segment through the Guadalupe Mountains presented some of the most formidable challenges. Rising dramatically from the Chihuahuan desert floor, the Guadalupe Mountains form an imposing limestone reef, the fossilized remains of an ancient sea that covered this region 250 million years ago. Today, Guadalupe Peak stands as the highest point in Texas at 8,751 feet, a silent sentinel watching over the desert below. For Butterfield stagecoaches, this terrain meant navigating narrow mountain passes, steep inclines, and treacherous descents. The stark beauty of the landscape belied its dangers. Water was scarce, temperatures fluctuated dramatically, and the isolation made travelers vulnerable to attack. The stagecoach itself was an engineering marvel of its time. The Concord coach, manufactured by Abbott Downing Company in Concord, New Hampshire, was specifically designed for rough terrain. These coaches featured a unique suspension system using leather thoroughbraces, essentially leather straps that allowed the coach body to swing rather than bounce over rough terrain. This design gave rise to the term stagecoach swing, describing the swaying motion passengers experience throughout their journey. Each coach carried up to 9 passengers inside on 3 bench seats, with additional passengers sometimes perched on the roof. The cramped quarters forced strangers into intimate proximity for days on end, creating a unique social environment where class distinctions often dissolved in the face of shared hardship. Life aboard the Butterfield stage was anything but comfortable. Passengers paid approximately $200 for a one-way ticket, equivalent to about $6,000 today, for the privilege of enduring conditions that tested human resilience. The coaches traveled continuously, day and night, stopping only to change horses at stations spaced roughly 20 miles apart. Sleep came fitfully, if at all, as passengers attempted to rest while being jostled over rutted trails. One journalist who made the journey wrote that passengers were jerked, tossed, slammed, bumped, and shaken, until their heads seemed ready to snap off. Meals were hasty affairs at station houses, where travelers had just minutes to consume whatever food was available before the coach departed again. The standard Butterfield schedule allowed no time for leisure or sightseeing. The Guadalupe Mountains segment featured several crucial stage stations. The Pinery Station, situated at the base of Guadalupe Pass, served as an essential waypoint. Here, fresh horses were hitched to coaches, and passengers could briefly stretch their legs while station employees worked with practiced efficiency to prepare the stage for the next grueling section of trail. Archaeological excavations at the Pinery Station ruins have revealed a surprisingly complex operation. The station consisted of a main building constructed of limestone, corrals for horses and mules, blacksmith facilities, and living quarters for employees. These stations were not merely pit stops but frontier outposts of civilization, each maintaining a small community of workers dedicated to keeping the mail moving westward. The men who operated these stations lived isolated lives, constantly vigilant against attack from hostile forces and the unforgiving environment itself. Station keepers typically managed a staff including hostlers who cared for the horses, blacksmiths who repaired equipment, and cooks who prepared meals for employees and passengers. Many were former soldiers, adventurers, or those seeking escape from more settled regions. Beyond the physical hardships of the journey, travelers faced the omnipresent threat of human conflict. The Butterfield route cut through territories long inhabited by indigenous peoples, particularly various Apache bands who viewed the stagecoaches as intrusions into their ancestral lands. The company established its route just a few years after the United States had acquired much of the Southwest through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo and the Gadsden Purchase. But these diplomatic arrangements with Mexico meant little to the Apache, who had never consented to either nation's claims. For the Apache, the Guadalupe Mountains held profound significance. The range provided not only tactical advantages for observing vast stretches of surrounding desert, but also spiritual importance. Apache oral traditions speak of the mountains as sacred places where deities dwelled and where ceremonial knowledge was revealed to their people. The intrusion of stagecoaches, with their noise, pollution, and the further encroachment they represented, constituted both a physical and spiritual violation. Attacks on coaches and stations occurred regularly, though historical records from this period often reflect the biased perspectives of European American sources. What settlers described as unprovoked raids were frequently understood by indigenous peoples as justified resistance against trespassers or retaliation for specific grievances. The complex dynamics of these intercultural conflicts cannot be reduced to simple narratives of heroes and villains. In addition to indigenous resistance, travelers faced threats from bandits who recognized the vulnerable stages as lucrative targets. Robberies were common enough that many passengers concealed valuables in secret compartments or false-bottomed luggage. The isolation of the route meant that help could be days away, and justice often came through extrajudicial means when it came at all. Despite these dangers, the Butterfield Overland Mail maintained a remarkable record of reliability. During its nearly 3 years of operation along the southern route, the company rarely failed to deliver the mail, although schedules sometimes suffered delays. This consistency proved crucial for connecting California to the rest of the nation during a period of national expansion and increasing sectional tensions. The success of the Butterfield stage was ultimately short-lived. By 1861, the outbreak of the Civil War made the southern route untenable as Confederate forces seized control of key territories. The service shifted northward, and technological advances soon rendered the stagecoach obsolete. The completion of the transcontinental telegraph in October 1861 meant that messages could be transmitted almost instantly across the continent. 10 years later, the Transcontinental Railroad connected the coast with a much faster and more comfortable mode of transportation. Yet the legacy of the Butterfield Overland Mail endures in the physical remains of its infrastructure and in its contribution to American connectivity. The company employed over 800 people and maintained approximately 250 stations across its entire route. It represented one of the largest business operations in the country at that time and demonstrated the nation's commitment to binding its distant territories together through communication. In the Guadalupe Mountains, traces of this historical episode remain visible to those who know where to look. The ruins of the Pinery Station stand as a testament to human determination, preserved within what is now Guadalupe Mountains National Park. Visitors can still walk portions of the original trail, imagining the rumble of approaching coaches and the clouds of dust that announce their arrival. The establishment of Guadalupe Mountains National Park in 1972 has helped preserve not only the natural splendor of the region, but also its cultural heritage. Park rangers and historians work to interpret the multi-layered stories of this landscape, from its geological origins to its significance for indigenous peoples to its role in westward expansion. Welcome to Southwest Desert, the channel that uncovers the hidden stories of the American Southwest. I'm your host, Alan. Parents today love to complain about teenagers. They lament how young people won't listen, act wild, challenge authority, obsess over money, and avoid hard work. Sound familiar? Now imagine going back in time over a century to territorial Arizona, before statehood, before cell phones, before TikTok. You might think teenagers back then were different, more respectful, harder working, more responsible. Well, today's story is going to shatter that myth with a spectacular case study in teenage rebellion from 1910. Two brothers, 18 and 16 years old, who weren't interested in honest work, decided the quickest way to solve their money problems was to rob a train. And not just any train, one carrying territorial officials and law enforcement officers. Even more remarkably, their pursuit and capture became a pivotal moment in transportation history and launched the political career of a man who would serve in Congress for 56 years, longer than anyone else in American history. This is the true story of the Woodson brothers' train robbery. It was April 1910 in Phoenix, Arizona Territory. Statehood was still almost 2 years away. The desert metropolis we know today was then a small frontier town surrounded by agricultural land, connected to the outside world primarily by railroads. In this dusty, developing city lived two brothers, Ernest "Ernie" Woodson, 18, and his younger brother Oscar, 16. Little is known about their family background, Their parents aren't mentioned in historical accounts, suggesting a notable lack of supervision. What we do know is that the Woodson brothers had a problem many teenagers would recognize. They were completely broke. Like many teenagers throughout history, Ernie and Oscar had definite ideas about what kind of work they were willing to do. They spent considerable time applying for jobs around Phoenix, but each opportunity encountered the same objections. Agricultural work, too physically demanding from sunrise to sunset 6 days a week. Construction, similar complaints. Factory work, monotonous and exhausting. The brothers had clear employment criteria. The job should be fun, require minimal effort, and pay well immediately. Unsurprisingly, Phoenix employers in 1910 weren't racing to meet these demands. As April stretched into May, the brothers' financial desperation grew. They spent long days lounging outdoors, watching dust devils swirl across the landscape, talking endlessly about their money problems. That's when Oscar had a sudden inspiration. His eyes lit up as he turned to his older brother with an idea about robbing a train. Ernie's response was skeptical. The idea seemed absurd. Where would they get the money for train tickets? How would they pull it off? What about the risks? But Oscar was undeterred. He had thought it through. They could afford the inexpensive Phoenix-Maricopa shuttle, and the element of surprise would work in their favor. Gradually, Ernie's resistance weakened as Oscar laid out the details. The brothers developed their plan: travel by train, rob the passengers, and escape to Mexico. Simple, direct, and potentially lucrative. By May 11th, 1910, they were ready to put their criminal scheme into action. That morning, the brothers somehow acquired 2 horses and revolvers. The historical record doesn't explain how penniless teenagers managed this feat, and rode along the railroad tracks. About 15 minutes from the station, they concealed their horses and returned to Phoenix. At the station, they purchased tickets for the 6:10 p.m. train and boarded inconspicuously. What they didn't know was that their chosen train was carrying several territorial officials returning from a legislative session, including the Attorney General and the Sheriff of Gila County. When the train reached the spot where they'd hidden their horses, the brothers sprang into action. They drew their revolvers and ordered the conductor to stop the train. Once it had come to a halt, they methodically robbed the passengers, targeting the territorial officials and law enforcement officers first. The irony of robbing a train full of government officials, including actual law enforcement, seemed lost on the teenage bandits. They collected approximately $300 in cash and valuables, equivalent to over $8,000 today. In a particularly shocking move, they pistol-whipped a passenger before leaping from the train, retrieving their horses and galloping south toward the Mexican border. News of the robbery quickly reached Phoenix, where it landed on the desk of Maricopa County Sheriff Carl Hayden. Hayden was a native Arizonan born in the territorial period, a man who had grown up during the Apache raids, the OK Corral gunfight, and the Pleasant Valley feud. Train robbery was a serious federal offense, and Hayden immediately took command of the response. Showing remarkable organizational skills, Hayden assembled a posse and arranged for a special train to transport them and their horses to the crime scene. At the robbery location, they found scattered evidence, discarded wallets and torn purses, and clear hoof prints leading south. The posse mounted their horses and began their pursuit, led by an expert Pima tracker. Sheriff Hayden traveled with them until they reached the settlement of Maricopa, where he made a decision that would transform the chase and, in some ways, symbolize the changing American frontier. At Maricopa, Sheriff Hayden encountered J.F. McCarthy, a hotel proprietor who owned something rare and valuable, an automobile. Specifically, a Stoddard Dayton worth $3,000, the equivalent of about $85,000 today. This vehicle held the territorial speed record and represented cutting-edge technology for 1910 Arizona. Hayden immediately recognized the advantage an automobile would provide in the desert pursuit. Horses, while reliable, suffered from the May heat and limited water. The sheriff proposed commandeering McCarthy's automobile with one condition from the owner: McCarthy would drive it himself. Hayden agreed without hesitation. He, McCarthy, and a U.S. Customs official climbed into the automobile and continued the chase, creating what may have been Arizona's first motorized posse. The automobile proved its worth as they navigated the challenging desert terrain. McCarthy skillfully maneuvered through arroyos, around cacti, and through greasewood brush. When they encountered the rest of the posse at a Papago, now called Tohono O'odham village, Hayden assessed the situation. The horses were exhausted from the heat and pace. He selected a small group of deputies to continue on horseback while he pressed ahead in the automobile. The tracking was straightforward, as the Woodson brothers had made no attempt to hide their trail. They were heading directly for Mexico, apparently confident in their escape plan. That confidence proved misplaced. After riding hard through the night, the brothers and their horses were exhausted. They stopped to rest in a sandy arroyo that offered some shade. While recovering, they spotted a dust cloud in the distance, another automobile, an extraordinary sight in the 1910 desert. In a critical error of judgment, the brothers assumed it was a wealthy miner on a recreational drive. Far from hiding, they emerged from cover, intending to request assistance. Instead, they found themselves facing Sheriff Hayden and his makeshift motorized posse. The deputies leapt from the vehicle, weapons drawn, and demanded surrender. Ernest immediately threw up his hands, but Oscar hesitated, his hand still in his pocket. One deputy cocked his weapon, creating a tense standoff. Sheriff Hayden intervened, speaking calmly to Oscar. He pointed out that the brothers' revolvers weren't even loaded, a fact they hadn't realized during their robbery. Using a measured, almost paternal tone, Hayden persuaded Oscar to surrender without violence. Less than 20 hours after the robbery, the Woodson brothers were in custody. The posse returned to Phoenix by train after the automobile suffered a flat tire, arriving to public acclaim. The citizens were particularly impressed by Sheriff Hayden's innovative use of the automobile, a technology that symbolized the modernization of law enforcement in the changing West. The Woodson brothers faced federal charges for horse theft and armed robbery. Found guilty, they were sentenced to 10 years in a Kansas penitentiary. However, they served only 3.5 years before being released on probation. Historical records don't mention what became of them afterward. Their brief criminal adventure represents their only appearance in Arizona history. For Sheriff Carl Hayden, however, the train robbery became a stepping stone to an extraordinary political career. When Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, Hayden successfully ran for Congress, beginning an unprecedented 56-year tenure in Washington. Hayden's life spanned a remarkable breadth of American history. Born in territorial Arizona, he witnessed the final chapter of the frontier era. Then, as a congressman and senator, he navigated World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, the Korean War, the Cold War, and the Vietnam War. He watched transportation evolve from horses to automobiles to airplanes to spacecraft, and played a role in that transformation through legislation. But it was his role in the Woodson brothers' case that first demonstrated Hayden's pragmatic leadership and willingness to embrace new technology. That innovative spirit would serve him well through decades of political service until his retirement in 1969 at age 91, after serving in Congress longer than anyone else in American history. Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for another Southwest Gold Story. Check out my large catalog of Southwest videos and playlists on historical tales, legends, lost gold stories, and adult bedtime stories. If you like a certain image from my videos, tell me in comments and give timestamp. Happy trails! Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more great content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.